Polly says, do you suggest only providing a full resume if requested?
Okay, this is the way, yes. The way that this really works is you have to understand that to you, everything that you've done has its purpose. And you guys have worked hard for that job history, because every little step we take is a step kind of on the ladder, if you will. But hiring managers and recruiters have to look at so many people's resumes and, LinkedIn profiles and so forth, that they have been telling us for basically since the market crashed in 2009, when they got piles and piles of resumes. Look, we don't need anything more than a 20-year history, because your skills need to be somewhat current. And for example, if you are an IT programmer and you programmed 30 years ago, but you haven't programmed since, you're probably not a good fit for a programmer job today because of how things have changed. So they feel that a 20-year history is plenty. They're not going to keep rating back and back and back. So even if you had all that there, they probably wouldn't rate it, but just the going rate that they want to see, because, that also makes, if you put more than 20 years, it makes your resumes longer, everything gets bigger, longer, etc. And they just don't want to see that detail. So they understand perfectly what you're talking about when you say it's a 20-year resume. So as far as the question is concerned, the only reason you really even need to bring that full resume to the employer is if there's something that you really feel you want them to see that's beyond the 20 years. But most employers can make their decision on you based on 20 years of employment history. And like I said, I understand that you guys have worked hard for those years prior to that, but it's just that they're not going to read back any further than that. So it is what it is.
And then do you suggest providing references only when requested?
Absolutely. Most of the time they won't ask you anymore. One of the things that we try to tell you is make sure that you have 4 well-rounded recommendations on LinkedIn, because your recommendations on LinkedIn go a long way for them not having to contact someone. And there are several reasons for this. Realize that you can't just go you can go just have your buddy write a recommendation, but if they click over to your buddy's profile and he has nothing to do with your industry or whatnot, they're going to realize that that's a buddy that just gave you a recommendation, because there's nothing, it's not like it's from a supervisor, a coworker, someone that knows your work ability. So you want to try to find people that know you in a work sense. Coworkers are fine because they've sat beside you. If you can't get somebody in management to do it, get a coworker to do it. Sometimes there are jobs where, like say in purchasing, you've worked with somebody over at another company for the last 15 years, day in and day out. You have to call them, work with them. That person can recommend you and say, her work always gets everything to us on time, she's meticulous, etc. So if you don't have direct supervisors to ask, or, bosses, then just think outside the box, but make it somebody that can actually recommend you based on your work, not your personal life, for LinkedIn. Employers, for the most part, won't call references, because I'm just going to say this, and I don't mean to be crude or whatever, but who's going to be silly enough to put down a reference of somebody that's going to say something bad about them? So most people will make sure that whatever references they put have good things to say about them. So they already know before they call those people that they're not going to say anything bad about you. And then as far as your past employers, most of them won't answer any questions due to legalities. So they try to call somebody. Those people will never return their calls because they just don't want to deal with it, or they'll pick up the phone and say, yes, I can verify they worked here, but I can't give you any further information due to legalities. So, hiring managers and so forth know that this is what they're walking into. So those LinkedIn recommendations, because they're actually tied to another profile, they can very quickly see if that person knew you in a work capacity or not and wrote that recommendation. So you don't need to put references there at all, and have some ready in case they ask, but most of the time they won't ask. Another little tip on this front for you guys is, when you get to an interview, a lot of times you will get asked the question in an interview, do you have a problem with me calling your past employer? They probably 99% aren't even planning on calling that person. They're simply asking you to watch your reaction of how you act, because things show on their faces and people react without really realizing it. But if you didn't get along with their last employer, sometimes people show fear or they get uptight, and that tells them all they need to know. So you always want to prepare for that question and, basically be willing to let them do that. They're probably not going to. They're looking for your reaction. just so you know, because that's a little trick employers use in interviewing.